So I hope this video reaches as many individuals as possible. I feel like this is the most profound and most powerful thing that I've learned up to date in terms of my own journey. And I think I might even post it on my Facebook. So today is March 2nd, 2021, lesson 122 in the Course in Miracles student workbook. Forgiveness offers everything I want. So I wanted to introduce the idea that we need to train ourselves to let go of the things that we fear to lose. Why? Because attachments are the root of all suffering. And because of that, we have learned as humans that we learn and grow through pain, right? It's because through trial and error, we learn the things to do and not to do so we can survive. So when we train to let go of the things that we fear to lose, we also allow ourselves to welcome phases of expansion, quote, that come as natural extensions of embodying a state of joy and love, okay? So when we're looking at joy and love, we're looking at states, right? Because since we are self-conscious beings, we seek meaning from our results, which means that in turn, we find meaning in our suffering. So you can say that this life is not real, right? That this is just a phase or this is just a dream, but you cannot doubt the existence of pain within this realm, okay? So that seems more real than anything else. And all of our actions will indicate that we do believe in that, right? Because, if you touch a stove, you're gonna, react in a manner where it's painful. So not only that, but there's so much pain that it establishes something that you cannot deny, right? Which means that there's the absolute opposite. So we will learn that this realm, the incentive to grow is the greatest. Why? Because the amount of suffering that we go through only allows us to just push even further to not suffer anymore, to find peace within ourselves. So when we move on from that, we have these indications that we're done with it, right? So because we've derived so much meaning from pain and joy, sometimes that's the only way that we can really understand what that really looks like for us. So we have these joyful sorrows, these gifts of tears, right? Now, basically it's just freeing up the energy that we've held on so much because of the meaning that we derive from the pain. Washington Irving said, "There is a sacredness in tears. They're not a mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are the messengers of overwhelming grief, of deep contrition, and unspeakable love." So when you realize you're done with something, you see these expansions of consciousness. Basically, just like you tear a muscle when you're working out, it grows back stronger, right? So these are checkpoints. So similar to degrees, you can see this in martial arts disciplines, vocations. You cannot unlearn what you learn, and life is saying to recognize your growth so you can move on, okay? So when this happens, barriers are relinquished, thus allowing truth to reveal itself spontaneously. So basically these mental and emotional blocks allow us to know what our true potential actually is. Because the more that we understand that our potential is locked in our genetic code, then we know that the situational stress produced by particular situations unlocks these genes, building new parts of ourselves. So we never know how much is locked within our within ourselves, inside of ourselves. So the heavier the loads, the more you become informed, right? We are now forming as we are experiencing ourselves. So we can mold ourselves as we are going through life because you're doing more difficult things, more of you is unlocked, right? So you become the culmination of all the ancient wisdom locked inside of you biologically in your DNA, right? And it doesn't come out unless you stress and challenge yourself, transforming into your avatar, if you want to call it that, the consequence of all the prior incarnations, right? So your potential is what you could be in time. So you have to ask yourself, what is your ideal? And that question should be, what do I look like if I love myself 1000%? So when we take that in consideration, right, we look at the other side of the coin, okay? So we hold on to that emotional pain because it gives us meaning. The only way that we can let that heal or release is by forgiveness. So forgiveness offers everything I want. So forgiveness in this instance is synonymous to acceptance, okay? The more we accept ourselves, others, and the world, the more we love ourselves, others, and the world, okay? And this is done by the self-awareness process, which means that we have to be present, being aware of our thoughts, feelings, and reactions, right? And the self-awareness goes into self-exploration, self-discovery, self-understanding. The more we understand, the more we can love ourselves. The more we experience and practice love, the more we give and experience love. And that means that we're transforming, thus allowing us to master ourselves, okay? We're becoming self-realized, okay? And I will revisit that at the end. So this is only done by the present moment, right? Because our pain body, our collective psyche, thoughts and emotions, is the collective past within us, right? And we see this through generations, we see this through epigenetics, culture, identity, politics, within our experiences, right? And we can only heal all that through forgiveness. So what I've learned is that when we forgive others, we allow forgiveness within ourselves. And why is that? Because as you see the world, so are you. There's nothing out there but our consciousness. All we're seeing is ourselves. So the more we're taking this in consideration, we're starting to see that everything is just a reflection of who we are. When we accept something, we're given that power, okay? Because we're seeing it from a biased perspective, okay? When we're seeing it from an unbiased perspective, everything is perfect the way it's supposed to be. Now, when we're looking at the law of mirrors, if there's something that we want to change in others, that's within us, okay? So if we spot it, we got it. Now, if we have something that someone says that hurts us, makes us feel judged, or bothers us, that's something that we need to work through ourselves because we haven't loved that part of ourselves, okay? So we may love ourselves, but we don't love ourselves entirely with the same intensity. If we see something that we admire, love, that's something that is within us. So if we spot it, we got it from a positive perspective. And then on the other hand, if someone is trying to judge us, trying to bother us, or trying to do something to hurt us and it doesn't affect us, then that's part of them, okay? So you receive what you get, and what I'm learning is that you can only forgive fully in the present moment. Why? Because what I've learned is that I'm so attached to the present moment that it doesn't allow me to actually see things for its entirety, right? It doesn't allow me to accept, and it doesn't allow me to forgive even myself for not being able to do all the things that I want to do, and also forgive others, okay? So we can't deal with mental images, right? We can only deal with the present moment. So if we want to plan for the future, we can plan for it right now. So it's good to have anticipation and intention, but it's never good to have an expectation or assumption, because one, you'll be sadly dissatisfied, disappointed, and then discouraged, and then you never know what's going to look like, okay? So you can't have an expectations because there's going to be some form of dissatisfaction from that intention. But why is it important to have any form of intention? And that's because your subconscious mind is receiving all this information at 1/10,000 of a second, okay? So our conscious mind generalizes, distorts, and deletes information because it's too much for it to process. So our subconscious mind actually has hundreds of millions of bits of information that it's processing at a time. So we have to ask ourselves at every moment, is there joy, ease, and lightness in what I'm doing? If not, then time is covering the present moment. That's basically it, because that's the only way that we can really understand that. Because you can't give your full attention to something and feel resistance, okay? So when there isn't any joy, ease, or lightness, then we have to change how we're doing things, right? Because that comes from our why, right? Why we're doing it is because we're not allowing ourselves to actually be fully present. So it only takes 1/10,000 of a second to get something from which one is ready by virtue, okay? And we do this by surrendering the gratification of personal intentions, okay? Which means that we have to set aside our selfish little self, our ego, out of the equation so we can allow our selfless subconscious mind to take control. right? We've learned this through instinct. We've learned this through studies of psychocybernetics, the power of the subconscious mind. Basically, there is something that is orienting us through our attention to find the goals that we want, right? That's why they have the law of attraction, because basically whatever you put in your mind, that's what your mind is going to fulfill. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when you're in flow, when you're present, when you're in states, you're processing things at a higher degree. So when we take in consideration these moments, we have to look at the entirety of what life is, because life is also filled with challenges, right? So we have our living conditions and our coping mechanisms, and then we look at these things as problems. So we have to problem solve, if you want to call it that. So these aren't going anywhere, right? So we either deal with it in the future or we do it in the present. So when we have individuals that, try to deal with it in the present, they're sacrificing the future. So these are gangs, right? These are lower socioeconomic regions where there's individuals that are living in the moment and taking what they can, right? And then there are the other side of the coin where we try to deal with the future by sacrificing the present, right? So we have this archaic understanding of God, right? That we have to burn something valuable to sacrifice and please God. So we have discovered that, there is danger in the world and the future is where the threat is. So we sacrifice the present for a better future, right? So we forestall, we delay gratification, and we're putting faith in a system, basically society, of how this works, right? So we sacrifice things to have a payoff, right? Money is a promise, right? We store up all this credit, and basically we see that there's a payoff in the future. So when we are living for the future, right, in the present, we are now experiencing all that pain here. So when we do that, there are going to be obstacles that are going to come through to fruition, right? In our path where it's frightening, sometimes it's going to disgust us because we don't want to be that person, and we have to get over that very quickly, right? Because it's not about how we're filtering things, it's more about how we're acting through our own intentions to do what is necessary to become that which we want to be, right? So when we're afraid to do what's next, right, we avoid things because they make us feel negative emotions. And again, it's because we're looking at that from that lens, that perspective, that belief system, that paradigm, that there's negative and positive emotions. Of course, there's a continuum where we have negative emotions, quote unquote, where we contract, and then we have positive emotions where we expand ourselves. So just like our heart has an electromagnetic wave where it expands vibrations, where it's feeling love, and then contracts when it's fear. So when we look at these moments where it makes us fearful, we have to say, aha, that's where I need to work at. And take that as an opportunity to grow, to learn, right? Because most oftentimes we're not developed enough to handle it, so we have to do our best, and that's how we learn. Okay, so we have to forgive ourselves for being at the developmental stage that we're at. So most oftentimes we say that living in this life is miserable, and that makes it very difficult for us because we look at life as a problem, right? And then problem worth solving, and basically we're so engaged in the problem that it justifies the act and the fact that the problem exists. The only problem that we have is being severed and separated from self, okay, from our spirits, because we must know that there is a problem and it cannot be solved if it's not known. Even if it is solved, right, because all our problems will be solved as we understand that we are self, that we are spirits, they still have a problem because it's not recognized that it's solved. So when we look at Jung, the collective unconscious, we look at the thought that self is the spark of divinity that transforms the future into the present moment through conscious action. The self is something underneath your will, a deep instinct that orients you, the mechanism that directed your attention in the present moment, the future self trying to manifest itself in the present moment. So when we are looking at that, we are now understanding that our experiences have more to reveal for ourselves, because when we're doing something new, we're gaining ourselves more information. We're now becoming more of ourselves because we're taking in consideration what will we look like if we loved ourselves.